As for Cabin 724, is our traffic about our 12:30?
That's 12:30, 1 o'clock, Cabin 724 now.
Okay, we got it.
Cabin 724, maintain visual separation from the candidate, clear visual approach, runway 4 right.
There's visual 4 right.
That's 904, rear speed 170 for tower station. Get follow morning 727, 1 o'clock, 6 miles right station, coming out at 35.
It is said that 1 in every 5 Americans can trace their roots through the shores of East Boston. To this day, East Boston has played an extremely important role in the advent of Boston as a great city. We are part of Boston, but we're an island, a neighborhood set apart by many great things, by its richness in land and by sea and cultures, and by its location as a gateway to the north, by its hardworking people, its perseverance in the face of unjust burdens, and most of all, by its incredible resilience and ability to come together as a community to prosper and succeed. A success which should be shared by all who make this place their home.
I've been involved in community activism around airport issues, among other things like social justice and transportation and education and environmental issues. I'm a lifelong resident of East Boston in the Jeffreys Point neighborhood. Back in the 1960s, when the airport was much smaller, before it became a, quote, jetport and an international airport, the people who ran the airport took a course at Boston College to learn how to become movers and shakers in the business world. The charge at that time was to expand airport operations and increase the capacity of the airport in terms of the number of planes and the number of passengers that would come in and out of Logan. This is an unusual airport. It's right in the middle of a residential community, and it's right on Boston Harbor.
As a young child, I remember my sister and I used to run and hide under my grandmother's dining room table. She lived at 541 Bennington Street, which is directly under the flight path of 33 left departures. And back in the day with the Stage 2 aircraft, they were really loud. I mean, they would shake your house and they would shake your body. My family was involved in airport activism really early on, so I sort of grew up around it. The physical expansion and destruction that happened in East Boston is pretty severe. Not only did the airport take an entire neighborhood over at Neptune Road, but prior to that, the Mass Pike tunnel projects took significant amounts of homes and businesses and created scars in the middle of our neighborhood. And one of the main beneficiaries of those projects, those two tunnels, was the airport. The loss of Wood Island Park, an 83-acre park designed by Frederick Law Olmsted as part of what we now call the Emerald Necklace development, were terrible. But the psychological losses were worse.
What I can say, and I'll always say, nothing will ever replace Wood Island Park. When I have a meeting at the airport sometimes and I'm up in the tower and I look out that window and I see a runway where Wood Island Park would be, it really, really hurts, but it's gone, and my great-grandchildren and the small children will never know what we had when I had my children and when I was a teenager. Not only was Wood Island Park beautiful in the summer, but in the winter, that's where we used to go sledding and skating. So it really was an area that was really lost to us.
When people saw the park going, I'm told by Mary Ellen and my mother, they were dejected and demoralized. And that's what the airport wanted at the time.
This neighborhood was a very thriving, healthy neighborhood consisting of 2- and 3-family houses. The houses were represented by immigrants that came here from mostly Italy that had beautiful little backyard vegetable gardens and kept their houses in very, very good condition. A blue-collar working neighborhood where everybody knew the neighbors very closely, kids playing out in the street, stickball, baseball, that was their whole life. They didn't know much else. They didn't go many places. I grew up at 20 Neptune Road in East Boston, at this site right here, near Logan Airport. The first generation that came here and settled in this neighborhood is very important. They came here for a better life, to have a piece of America. And I remember all the people that lived here whose sons came home from World War II and what they represented. And these were the people that got up every day, went to work in factories, built a family, built a neighborhood, and they represented a wonderful, safe neighborhood.
To create new runways, to lengthen existing runways. One of their goals was to come into the community and move people out who were living too close to the airport. Trying to use eminent domain by taking people's houses and paying them less than fair market value for their property. It was a huge threat to the existing community.
I lived here, my daughter lives here, and I feel that we've been uprooted. I mean, and now I'm afraid if the federal people come in, they'll be eminent domain, and I certainly don't want eminent domain. I want to be free to go and do as I please, not to be thrown out.
They took my grandmother's house and knocked it down to make room for the turnpike with no relocation assistance. I mean, 70-year-old widow, didn't speak English. They came in and gave her $1, said the house is ours, move. Really absurd level of, I would say, brutality by a government on its people. And this went on in Brighton, it was going on in Somerville, in Cambridge, in East Boston. In East Boston, there were two big threats: the highways that were proposed to cut across the neighborhood and the airport, which was trying to expand. The airport was particularly nasty in the way they were treating people.
When they built this Blue Line extension, they cut the street in half and had the Blue Line trains running through the middle of Neptune Road. And then the highway became another project that also cut the street in half on the other direction. So little by little, the street was starting to get choked off because of the progress of growth in the area.
The system is really rigged against the community, and more so. The culture of the airport is against the community. They can't understand partnership.
In a few months, this entire street is going to be gone. It's too late for this street. All these houses will go within a year or so. We want to prevent that from happening in other neighborhoods of East Boston and Winthrop.
In September of 1968, people soon realized that writing letters and going to a meeting once a year was not making any change in the philosophy of the airport of expanding into the neighborhoods. People had a notion that you can't fight City Hall. At that time in history, in other parts of our country, a different kind of activism was going on. At night on the evening news, they saw what was going on in the South around the civil rights issue, where people took to the streets and actually stood in front of the people who were their oppressors, unconsciously or subconsciously. People said, hey, that might be what we're going to have to resort to in order to make our issues known. In Jeffrey's Point, the airport was trying to fill in what was called Bird Island Flats, tidelands at the end of the point, and they wanted to fill it in and create a cargo facility down there, which was immediately adjacent to this neighborhood. And in order to fill it in, they had huge, big, long dump trucks full of dirt and fill, and they would trundle them through the neighborhood. And those big trucks, uncovered, the fill spilling into the streets, traveling above the posted speed limit, were coming through every hour. And children were in danger, playing and crossing the street, senior citizens. It was a very dangerous situation, not to mention the idea that the vibrations from the trucks were literally shaking the houses, shaking their very foundations. So the group of women, and mostly women were in the leadership at that time, decided that they would step into the street in front of the trucks, and it would be just women and children. They asked that no men be involved because the fear was men would become confrontational with the truck drivers and that would evolve into violence, and that was not what the purpose was. We picked a time which was around late afternoon when people were home from work, and we called the TV stations thinking that it would get on the evening news and the cause would be broadcast outside of East Boston to the movers and shakers and decision makers on Beacon Hill. So it happened. We stepped into the street in front of the trucks, and you can imagine the truck drivers were furious. They were threatening. They moved the trucks right up to where we were standing in the middle of the street. And of course, some police came down. Immediately, the state police from F Troop from the airport. So everyone got shoved by the state police to get out of the way to clear the way for the trucks.
At that time, nobody knows who sent the state troopers, but they sent about 30, and we thought we were going to be arrested. And I told everybody, lay down on the street and let them carry to the paddy wagon. But what happened, the state troopers came in and they did a job on us. They beat all the women up. We all got beat up.
Then the local policeman from Station 7 showed up and immediately saw that this was an overreaction on the part of the state police, and they stepped in to intercede and say, look, these are our people. We'll take charge of the situation. Of course, these are my words. God knows what they really said to them. Who had television cameras going, recording all of this. And it was put on the evening news, and people couldn't get over the fact of the brutality that was visited on the women. Out of that first day of protest came a rising of awareness on the part of the elected officials, specifically Mayor Kevin White was the mayor then. Our issue was to move the trucks away from Maverick Street and come into the airport without coming through the community to get there. It was a very moving kind of event, transposing what was going on there, people fighting for their rights, to East Boston, where this was fighting for our rights as well.
I had the privilege of serving the East Boston Little City Hall in the late 60s, early 1970s, working with community groups opposing the mindless expansion of Logan Airport and the environmental damage and transportation damage it was doing to the adjacent communities. Later, I became Secretary of Transportation under Governor Dukakis. There had been a dramatic shift in political attitude to an attitude much more friendly to the community concerns. And we had also been able to change the people at the Port Authority, who were at that time much more community-oriented.
Out of that act of civil disobedience came a plan from the community to go the legislative route and submit under initiative petition bills in the legislature to control all aspects of the Port Authority, the physical expansion, the environmental harm. Then we also decided to coalesce with other groups outside of East Boston who were involved, who were impacted by the airport. The idea was to keep the issue of airport impacts on the front page, so to speak, and within the minds of the legislators who were in charge of the airport via the Enabling Act. More and more people came to our aid from the academic community, scientists who knew about the effects of air pollution on our health, noise pollution on our health. We connected with other groups, even around the country, who were working on similar things of airport impacts in their communities. Part of our effort, especially during the Big Dig days, was to increase mass transit opportunities all over, yes, but specifically for us in terms of coming and going to the airport. And one of those efforts that came out during the Big Dig construction was to capture travelers to and from the airport on mass transit, so they wouldn't have to take their cars, they wouldn't have to make a lot of changes, they could just hop on a red line in the Cambridge area and then come right through to the blue line to the airport.
At the time, the biggest threat that the port faced as an institution was that there was tremendous congestion getting to Logan Airport, and they very much wanted an additional tunnel built so that their access would improve. The community was in a very complicated place because they didn't want to see the Port Authority get more access because it would strengthen an institution that had been very nasty to them. At the same time, the community was also stuck in the same traffic jam. So we reached a compromise where the highway proposal, the tunnel proposal, which had been proposed to go right through the middle of the community, instead went through the middle of the airport. The Port Authority would give up some of its land to accommodate the tunnel, and the Port Authority would agree to limit the amount of parking that it had. Both the community and the airport could benefit from the new accessibility, but that benefit would only be durable if the Port Authority made a continuing priority of getting people to Logan without their automobiles. And the Port Authority at that point in time agreed to all of those restrictions, and now they're trying to violate them. They're trying to do a major expansion of terminals without improving either roadway or transit access, which is clearly going to lead to more and more gridlock. Absurdly, the airport is also going to be drowning in the traffic which they're creating. At the same time, the Port Authority's policies are anti-community and anti-environmental, but also anti-themselves, and not respectable in any way. It makes no sense.
And Randy, we all know that Boston is growing, but this new study details just how much of an impact it will have on commuting in the coming years. The business group called A Better City studied the potential impact of the ever-growing population of the city caused by younger workers choosing to live here, along with an older population moving out of the suburbs and into Boston. The increases over the next 15 years are pretty staggering.
You can't increase the size or the scope of an airport. Like, you can't add to it until you understand what impacts we're having today that's impacting us today. Are we already at dangerous levels of pollution? If we are, we need to stop. But I think there really needs to be more of a, if that data was available and it was live and it was out there, they could change their behavior based on that data, on a daily basis. They could say, oh, we better change runways, we better move this aircraft, maybe we can't depart as many planes within this hour. Economically, it may not be great, but really what matters, it's like they're killing us. That's the most important thing. So
the community would have preferred no growth at all at the airport. What the Port Authority negotiated for was a view that the airport had to grow to respond to the economy, but that it should agree to cap all environmental impact to make sure that there was no worsening of traffic congestion, no worsening of air quality, no worsening of noise.
Well, the biggest challenge about mitigation and getting mitigation for our communities has been a challenge because I think we're basically working with an authority that doesn't acknowledge a quality of life in our communities. So Massport, through the years, has been pretty much willing to make donations to various community groups, foundations, scholarships, without acknowledging the severe impacts that we do realize when we're dealing with air and noise. To that extent, they haven't really, I won't say caught up with the science, but let's just say they might ignore some recent science, but more recent science where we do have some maybe causal connection with the impacts of an airport upon a community.
The folks who work at Massport are working at the pleasure of people who are political appointees. In order to survive and feed their family and work a full career in this industry, they need to make sure that they're doing what the Massport board and the governor at the time and the CEO at the time want of them. But always doing less is always a safer bet. You can't get too far ahead of your bosses. The airline industry is so powerful. With all the conflict that's occurred in this airport struggle, and for so long, and all that's at stake with the airport making claims of being the engine of the economy and all these power-packed positions that are designed to cut people off. Oh, you're engine of the economy, how could East Boston stand in your way? Well, we don't want the economy? We want to hurt the economy here? For us to advocate for some of the things that the Port Authority could do, so they could do a lot of things, but they would have to buck the trends of the industry. They'd have to go against the FAA sometimes. And to get people who are very risk averse, conscious of the impacts that politics can have on their career, to stick their neck out, it's not happening. It really has to come from above. It really requires very strong political commitment to environmental justice, environmental improvements to the people on the ground. The airport's constituent is the air traveler. The FAA's constituent is the airlines. And so we end up cut out of the process. And we're really nobody's constituent in this argument.
And we don't see any support from The people that we've elected, we don't see any support from the rest of the state or the city. We don't see any federal support. There's really nothing that's looking out. It's somehow it's almost like there's this loophole in these air quality standards around airports because it's such an economic driver, and they've somehow bypassed any laws to be able to do this, and they've found ways to do it.
We started in Somerville to look at transportation research as something to get into when we realized that many of the policy leaders who make decisions or who run our transportation systems, including airports, highways, trains, were not really aware of the environmental health issues associated with transportation sources of both noise and air pollution. We found some pretty disturbing issues in Somerville and Chelsea, which are very close to East Boston. Chelsea's right on its border, and those two communities are the densest communities in Massachusetts. They have the most immigrants per square mile. They have the most multifamily population per square mile. They also have the regional transportation system kind of overrunning them. So the highways overrun those communities that are close to the core of the city and economic activity. And it's often the environmental justice populations or mixed populations that live right next to those regional highways, regional airports.
What we see here behind me is the Sumner Tunnel and the Callahan Tunnel in opposite directions. When it was built, it sort of divided the community. The purpose of the tunnel, obviously, is to feed the entire North Shore. But a big part of that, with the thousands and thousands of cars coming from Massport, they're our biggest polluter, I'd say, in terms of our air quality here. And air quality is not stagnant. It moves, so we all share this bad air. For all intents and purposes, we're getting really a double whammy here. But what we'd like to see in the community, at least some of us that work on maybe the harder environmental issues, are ways for Massport to decrease true air impacts and noise impacts. And to that extent, that's probably our biggest challenge in the past, and it's our biggest challenge going forward.
What's now happened is the current mayor is not taking any particular active position in favor of the community. He's reflexively supporting aviation growth agenda on the theory that it's good for business, without recognizing that it is not at all good for business to drown the city in gridlock, which is where we're headed. It makes no sense to expand this airport beyond the capacity of the roadway and transit system to get people to Logan. This is a totally irrational, very short-sighted set of actions that both the airlines and the Port Authority Board are taking. But the elected officials have to demand that the Port Authority must make the airlines pay to upgrade the transportation system, and we're not getting that from the locally elected officials.
It's really frustrating because there isn't a company I can sue. It's not a state agency, it's not a private agency, it's just like this quasi thing that goes back and forth. I mean, we don't have any power. They really have a hold of our neighborhood and our community in such a way that you can't really challenge them.
They have not given us one indication they want to work with us. We've really tried as an authority. Why should I change my mind for them now? I don't know how to vote, to be honest with you.
The policy that was adopted represents a lot of dialogue, a lot of work by the governor's office, the mayor's office, the Port Authority, and the communities to try to get a policy out of the Port Authority. It's far from what we asked for. There are several real deficiencies in it yet, and yet it is a beginning, and we're willing to work over the next few months to see that it works.
I think the only solution is really to legislate. Like, I think you have to change the power that Massport has, or you have to legislate some way to monitor the air quality independently in the neighborhood so that therefore there's a liability.
So we were very lucky that we had a continuity of good governors who accumulated a new board of a very different, much more community-oriented and environmentally oriented philosophy. And then in the successive years, because we had a continuity of a good governor, Governor Dukakis, really wanting to do the right thing by the community and by the environment and by themselves, but were willing to stand up to the Federal Aviation Administration and the airlines and not just be the puppet of the airlines, but actually ask the question, what is good for Massachusetts, what is good for the city of Boston, and including in that definition not just the business interests, but also the East Boston, Winthrop, and Revere community as part of the definition of who the relevant community is. We've had accumulation of anti-environmental governors who did not and do not care about the East Boston community or moderate income people at all, consider themselves business oriented. So you've got a real accumulation of a board majority that supports very different policies. So in the face of a governor who's not sympathetic, the community is now facing a much more difficult challenge.
We need for everybody to understand the impacts, because the impacts affect us all. The impacts affect Democrats and Republicans. The impacts affect Latino residents and Italian residents. There's no Arabic noise or black noise, it's only noise. There's no Italian pollution or Irish pollution, it's only pollution.
The communities of East Boston and Chelsea had a high level of people who were working poor, and where there were a lot of minority communities living. Those communities, it seemed from study, were impacted more than communities that had a higher income kind of people or more homogeneous people living in those communities. Through history, whether it was highway expansion or school desegregation or environmental impacts, these communities always got the worst of the deals.
Yo soy Luz Heredia, soy de El Salvador. Pues en este momento estoy acá en Boston, vivo en la calle Habre. Tengo 2 hijos, uno de 11 y la niña de 10. Pues yo tengo, como les comenté, 2 hijos, los 2 padecen de asma. Pues en realidad mi hijo nació con asma, pero mi hija no. Siento que es una condición para uno de padre para preocuparse. He pasado 5 ocasiones que yo lo he visto a mi hijo cansado, sin respirar. Pues yo me voy a la clínica, de inmediatamente cuando ellos me lo miran, ellos me dicen, no, tenemos que llamar la ambulancia, tu hijo viene muy mal. Cuando ellos me dicen eso, yo me sentía súper mal. Más al ver a mi hijo tan pequeñito, tan indefenso, que él sin poder hacer nada, pues yo, para serles sincera, yo pasaba solo llorando y llorando. Verlo a él acostado en la camilla, que le ponen muchos aparatos en su cuerpo, la mascarilla para respirar, oxígeno. Son momentos muy difíciles en mi vida y que aunque yo no quisiera ser fuerte, pues no, a mí se me derraman las lágrimas porque pues digo, no, es injusto ver a un niño tan indefenso, tan pequeñito y padecer con esos problemas.
We're bringing in all the best air quality experts so people can understand the air quality impacts. What happens to human health when we breathe ultrafine particulate matter?
Because transportation fuels tend to be similar, whether it's on the road or on the jets, there are some things that we know pretty well from all of the near roadway studies. For example, we know that if a neighborhood is right on a really busy highway, they tend to have much higher risk for childhood asthma, so maybe 50%. And now we're talking the people who live a few houses from the highway, so it's a really steep gradient. They're not like a regional pollutant where you might see a haze over a city in the summer in New York City or Boston. These are pollutants that are more like a mechanics exposure. So they're really high when you're close to the source, but they drop off a lot. The people who are most exposed have about a 50% higher risk. You know, some people get asthma, some don't, and asthma can be caused by a lot of things. So it's tricky to sort out what the causes are, but there's been a lot of research on that in the roadways, and some with regard to Logan and the children that are closer to Logan than other children. With regard to air pollution, the pollutants are a little bit different also, whether you're taking off or you're landing. So when you're taking off, the jet pilots are basically stepping on the gas. It's very high thrust, like a car or a truck stepping on the gas. And when they do that, they kick out a lot of black carbon. So sometimes if you stand and watch planes, which can be fun for kids or families, you'll see a dirty cloud behind some of the planes, not all of them, and that's black carbon. So that's a pollutant of concern. It's inhalable, can stay in the lungs. It also has characteristic of picking up other toxins that stick to it, and when it's in your lungs or your cardiovascular system, other chemicals that are part of you may get disrupted because they may stick to the black carbon.
Por ejemplo, este es el Flovent. Él tiene que usarlo todos los días, 2 veces al día. Pues es algo que él no puede vivir sin esto. Entonces, pues digo, wow, pasar toda su vida, pues a sus 11 añitos y todo el tiempo con medicamento. Este es el albuterol, es cuando hay momentos que le dan ataques, que él deja de respirar, él se cansa muchísimo, él tiene que usarlo. Él tiene que, por ejemplo, él está en programas de ejercicio, él tiene que llevar su medicina. Si en un momento a él le pasa esos ataques, él tiene que mantenerlo con él. No es justo que ellos se mantengan todo el tiempo con medicina. Por ejemplo, él puede jugar cualquier deporte, pero cuando el clima está muy frío, él toca estar en casa. Él es un niño muy activo, a él le gusta hacer mucho ejercicio, pero hay momentos que la temperatura está demasiado fría, no lo puedo sacar. Entonces, para él yo lo veo que él se siente triste, él se siente mal y pues me dice, mamá, ¿por qué yo tengo esto? Y pues son cosas que no las he podido superar, porque al ver a un hijo sufrir, que ellos no pueden hacer sus actividades físicas como deben de ser todo el tiempo, pues toca impedirlas por el asma.
With the airport now proven to cause a 360% increase in probable childhood asthma, with it already been proven to cause COPD 200% more likely, and my father has COPD, and my children were all given inhalers, and so many other children in this neighborhood are sickened. With all that we know, it is irresponsible to expand those impacts without attempting to do what you can do. We can't leave those things on the floor.
You know, everyone always asks if you live in East Boston, like clearly, you know, you must hear the planes all the time. We don't necessarily hear the planes all the time, but we do frequently smell the pollution coming from the airport. So we smell fumes, especially on cloudy days, rainy days, overcast days. As a parent with a little 2-year-old girl that we're raising here, and we want to raise our family, we may have more. I mean, the biggest concern is how's this going to impact our health in the long term? Are we going to be sick sooner? Are we not going to be around as long to be parents for her? It's scary, and you know, my wife will come home with the baby. She'd like to take her to the playground. Yeah, you know, it's kind of hard to say to your kid, no, you can't go out because it's, you know, it's smells like exhaust, so you're gonna have to stay inside and play today. You know, how do you say that to like a 5-year-old?
Everybody cares about kids who have asthma, as they should, because it could affect them learning. You know, it scares their families and friends and school teachers, and it's stressful for people with asthma and their families if it's not under control, so you want to manage it. But with mortality, the way we look at health statistics, mortality counts much more heavily than an asthma attack. So often it's a good idea to look at both adult premature mortality and things like childhood asthma, because then you get the whole picture of what the health costs might be in a community.
All these houses had porches in the back. From the back porches, everybody had clotheslines that connected to a pole in the back. And when my mother or my grandmother or my aunt would wash clothes and hang them out to dry, the soot from the engines from the jet planes and propeller planes going over on a daily basis would have the exhaust and the soot coming out, and they would end up on the clean clothes. So they would have that odor about fuel on them. That's how low the planes were at that time.
There's emerging evidence of adults having faster cognitive decline in their ability to think as they get older. That's a little bit accelerated when you have exposure to air pollution. And children have a harder time too. And there's some emerging research which has not been as thoroughly studied as childhood asthma or cardiovascular or lung cancer mortality, that autism risk is much higher in children that have higher exposures to busy roadways or perhaps airport pollutants. That's of concern like asthma because it could be lifelong, but in some ways it's maybe worse because it changes how a person thinks or how their emotions might work, and that can be lifelong. And that's a risk, especially for the full term of pregnancy and for the first year of life.
I mean, since I've lived here, I've done everything from, I visited with the EPA downtown, they have an office, they have an outpost, about this problem, considering that, I'm saying there's no way that this is legal for them to dump so much pollution in our neighborhood. And they said to me that they regulate the engines on the planes, but they don't regulate the airport. So the airport as a whole is basically allowed to emit as much pollution as they wish. As long as they're doing it through the approved engines, then it's okay. But it could be 1,000 engines blowing exhaust this way, and that's somehow acceptable. I think about it, if it was a factory down the street that was pouring, waste into the water supply, or similar to what just happened in Michigan with, lead pollution in the water supply, even if it was a smokestack from a factory that was blowing pollution in our neighborhood, there would be regulations around it. We have an online place where you can log a complaint against the airport, and it's called noise complaints. Of course, they won't call it pollution report. This is, an example of what they send you. Usually it's just these letters, these form letters they send back. And then they sent, as stated in your previous report, you're affected by the startup role of aircraft accelerating. They basically tell you matter-of-factly what's actually happening on the airport. So they didn't provide me with the data, and so I constantly am getting back to them and asking them. And then they sent me this final report, which is, it's not labeled properly. It's not even, it's just a bunch of noise. I mean, they just say like court year 1, log normal, blah, blah, blah. Like there's nothing to say. I just want to know, am I being exposed to unhealthy levels of toxins from the airport? But without that data collection, without them capturing that, there's no way to go back and fight it or anything because we don't have the data. We just don't have the data, and they won't give it to us. So this is unbelievable. So this is, first of all, the East Boston Times, sort of the East Boston propaganda machine. This is, sort of owned by, by our local electeds, and Massport clearly, because they buy the biggest, ad on the back of this. This one isn't even as ridiculous as some of the other ones, because the other ones, like, they highlight the parks and they highlight, all these things that are happening in the neighborhood, what a great neighbor they are, we're such great friends, we're such great neighbors, but they're literally killing us. Like, it is just so absurd to say, a good neighbor. I have a good neighbor next door. My friend Herbie and Alba next door, they're good neighbors. They are not trying to kill me, okay? I feel powerless. I feel underrepresented. I mean, we moved here as this is our home. This is where we're gonna live. This is our community. This is where we're gonna raise a family. And there's no place like it. We have great neighbors. We have such diversity here. It's just such a unique, unbelievable place. We don't wanna leave.
Little by little, as the airport started to grow, the first thing that I think that affected the people here was the noise. This street is in direct parallel with the runways at that time, and the airplanes that flew over used to break up conversations, and especially at nighttime.
And how's it been with the airplanes overhead?
Well, like I say, they're very, when you're on the telephone, you have to stop talking until a plane goes by. My windows are all rattling from all putty being off of it, and our windows really rattle. Anybody visits me, they say, wow, what's that? And they hear the windows rattling, and they feel that the planes are really very disturbing.
And we'd all land in the hospital. In fact, I had to call up the health and mental education the time the planes were flying over our house every second. We were all ready to go out of our minds. I mean, we were all going mental.
It turns out that the noise has its own health effects, and they're also pretty serious. And some of them affect the same health areas that the air pollution affects. So noise stress can cause cardiovascular risk. And right now, we can pin that to the louder noise levels, including from jets and also from traffic.
Noise events such as overflights at 3 in the morning at 82 or 80 decibels are much more damaging than ground noise. One super loud plane at 4:30 in the morning is enough to disrupt the sleep of thousands and thousands of families.
There have been some really interesting studies with people who are asleep and a jet flies over and their blood pressure goes up. They're not awake, they don't wake up, blood pressure goes up and the jet leaves and then slowly the blood pressure comes back down again. So there is a physical response there.
There's a real equity problem with the way noise is measured in airport contexts because close-in communities suffer a vast amount more noise energy and repercussions and impacts than further out communities. They use an annual average noise level to determine who gets soundproofing. And so what they say is that the day-night average noise level has to be 65 decibels on a continuous basis or higher before your home is eligible to receive soundproofing. So that means that you can have 80 or 82 decibel, 78 decibel airplanes flying over your home every half an hour, 20 minutes in the middle of the night. But if it doesn't average on an annualized basis over 65 decibels, you're not eligible for soundproofing. So we need to really work on ways that we can encourage only the quietest of planes to fly into Logan.
If you live next to an international airport, the noise and the pollution is not going away, but there are ways to control it. So we were able to get the airport and the FAA to implement certain kinds of modifications, like instead of running the airplanes on their full motors close to the terminal and close to the community, we got them to install APUs, auxiliary power units. There was a whole other issue about towing the planes from the gate out to the runways or to the taxiways. They, instead of running them on full motor, tow them out there without the motor. The airport is never going to go away. However, there are ways to lessen the impacts and provide for healthier communities that are next to the airport and under our flight tracks. For instance, instead of creating 5,000 additional spaces on the airport's so-called campus, create additional remote parking areas outside of the airport so that the cars don't have to come into the community, bringing its attendant pollution in with it. Another suggestion that came out of this process is to lessen the carbon footprint. There's a phenomenon where if someone's going on a trip, their family member will drive them to the airport, kiss them goodbye, go home. When they come back from their trip, go to the airport, pick them up, and take them home. 4 trips in and out with their cars and the attendant pollution. So one proposal that the community came up with is to say, charge every car that goes in and out of the airport a fee, a so-called carbon fee. And that money would go directly to the airport, which they can then use, the airport administration, to find other ways, for instance, to buy more land outside to create additional remote parking areas, keeping additional cars out so they wouldn't have to lift the parking fees. Another suggestion that community people and activists made was to regionalize the traffic to get more international airplanes coming in and out of Logan. So, to make a trade-off or a quid pro quo, you just move some of the domestic operations out of Logan to regional airports like Manchester, Green, and Rhode Island, different airports in the region, and that would take some operations out and allow the international flights not to add to what's already there. So those are suggestions that are made by impacted communities and the activists around them. So that's the effort today in 2016, is to get the airport to have a constant dialogue with community people. And instead of just being described as the economic engine of the region, an airport can operate using ways to mitigate, in terms of environmental mitigation, the health impacts of airport operations.
To achieve environmental justice, I think we have to have agencies that are less concerned about bondholders and more concerned about residents that live in their neighborhoods. So I think for them to really work with us so that we both can come to a win-win solution would be the optimal goal for the community, as it should be for the Port Authority.
This entire Neptune Road is practically gone, you must say. It's gone. And you can't stop progress. I mean, you can fight from here to hell. And we can't stop it. I don't care what demonstrations or who you talk to. The people only kid themselves. There's only so much they can do. What can the politicians do? They only can do so much.
Okay, thank you very much, sir.
The big problem that we faced back in the 60s and 70s was defeatism. People who were saying, well, we really can't do anything, they're bigger than us, so they're willing to give us a few baseballs for the Little League, let's settle for that and say thank you. We have to resist that temptation and demand that we not give up our rights for a few baseballs and a few drop-in centers. This is not acceptable. It's a threat to our health and safety. If somebody has a heart attack and has to be taken to the hospital through the tunnel, they're going to die. This is a serious problem, and we have to demand that people be honest about the severity of the problem and insist that the government change its policies to deal with it. I think the community has to make the first demand on the elected officials who come looking for their votes and say, you want my vote? I want to see where you stand on these issues. You have to stand up to these people and demand different behavior. That's the key step at this moment.
There are two ways you can go on this. You can stick your head in the sand and you can run away from the problem and you can grab what little you can for yourself, and wouldn't blame you for that. But you can also try to change the world. You can also work together to envision something better. And I think that's what really drew me into the airport fight, was the passion I saw from people and the commitment, and I couldn't understand how could they fight and lose like that. And then they get back up again and they keep coming and they keep coming and they keep coming. And that was really inspirational to me. And that was something that got me swept up into this thing. To keep on coming for the neighborhood, for the families here. To keep on organizing and to keep on trying to educate people that we don't have to accept the false choices, that it's either accept what the airport's offering or lose everything. So if we can educate people on the health consequences of this airport, if we can educate the airport on this topic and the politicians, and we can bring everybody together in the room, we can set a course for Boston Logan, allows them to build a comfortable terminal for the travelers who we want to show our Boston hospitality to. Let's welcome them to East Boston. And just let them know that as part of coming to East Boston, you take the tea to the city. That's how we do things in Boston. I want to bring a message of hope. I learned that message from the activists who worked so hard in the 60s, in the 70s, and the 80s so tirelessly, and they've done so much. I've seen that we can have an impact. We can change the trajectory of this thing. We can bend the curve. We've got soundproofing. We've got the foundation. We've got parks. And were they easy? No. We're not afraid of hard work, because I know people in East Boston and in the Boston region are better. We're not afraid of a challenge. We don't run away from it. We are the shining city on the hill. Let's all of us roll up our sleeves and tackle the issues. We've proven we can do it. We've done it before. Let's do it again.
In 1630, the Puritan John Winthrop said, "We must consider that we shall be as a city upon a hill. The eyes of all people are upon us. A city built and inhabited by men and women aware of their great trust and their great responsibilities. East Boston will forever shine as a great place for all. A neighborhood of Boston on the shining city on a hill."